At 7:32 a.m. on February 10, 1942, Lieutenant Commander John Thatch observed 6 Japanese Zeros diving toward his 4 Wildcats over Wake Island, aware that his pilots had perhaps only 90 seconds before they perished. 37 years old, 214 flight hours in Wildcats, 0 victories against Zeros. The Japanese had dispatched 18 Mitsubishi A6M Zero fighters to clear American patrols from the morning sky. Thatch's Wildcat was slower. The Zero ascended faster, turned more sharply, and could outmaneuver any American fighter at any altitude. Japanese aviators understood this. American aviators knew it too. The calculation was straightforward and ruthless. A Zero could outturn a Wildcat in 14 seconds. 14 seconds to get on your tail, 14 seconds to align weapons, 14 seconds to kill you. By February, the Pacific Fleet had lost 43 Wildcats in one-on-one dogfights with Zeros, 43 pilots who tried to outturn Zeros, 43 funerals. The pattern remained unchanged. American pilot spots a Zero. American pilot engages. Zero outturns him. Zero shoots him down. Command continued issuing the same orders. Avoid turning battles. Retreat if possible. But retreat meant leaving fellow pilots vulnerable. Retreat meant allowing a Zero to strafe your comrades while you fled. Thatch commanded Fighting Squadron 3. 4 pilots, 4 Wildcats, 4 men who relied on him to keep them alive. But he had no solution for the Zero's turn radius. No answer for its climb rate. No solution except to watch skilled men die. 3 days earlier, Thatch had been sitting in his quarters at Naval Air Station San Diego, staring at a pack of matches. His wife had sent them in a care package, 20 wooden matches in a thin cardboard box. He had been pondering the Zero problem for weeks. How do you defeat an enemy who can outturn you? How do you survive when the enemy is faster, more agile, and piloted by aviators with 2 years of combat experience? Thatch picked up 2 matches, held them parallel, then moved them in opposite directions, weaving them past each other. The matches intersected again, never separating, always supporting one another. And something clicked in his mind. What if 2 Wildcats didn't fight individually? What if they flew as a pair, weaving back and forth? If a Zero got on one Wildcat's tail, that Wildcat would turn toward his wingman. The wingman would turn toward him. They'd cross paths, and the Zero pursuing the first Wildcat would fly directly into the second Wildcat's guns. It was audacious. It defied every fighter doctrine in the U.S. Navy manual. Fighters operated solo. Pairs stayed together for navigation. Once combat started, you split and fought one-on-one. That was the conventional method. But Thatch couldn't stop visualizing those matches weaving together. Couldn't stop thinking about 43 dead pilots. He summoned his wingman, Lieutenant Edward O'Hare, to his quarters that night, demonstrated the matches, explained the weave. O'Hare studied them for 30 seconds, then asked a single question. When do we test it? 4 days later, Thatch was about to discover if his matchstick strategy would save lives or cost 4 pilots theirs. 6 Zeros were 200 yards out and closing rapidly. He moved to the radio. Time to attempt something never tried in combat. Time to see if 2 matches could defeat 6 Zeros. Thatch's voice crackled over the radio. Weave on my mark. His wingman, Lieutenant Junior Grade Edward Bassett, was 800 feet to his right. 2 additional Wildcats, piloted by Ensign Daniel Sheedy and Edgar Coulson, flew another 1,000 feet beyond Bassett. 4 American fighters in a loose formation. 6 Zeros diving from 11,000 feet. Standard doctrine dictated, split, turn independently, engage alone. But Thatch keyed the radio and issued an unprecedented order. Bassett on me. Weave pattern. Execute. Bassett banked toward Thatch. Thatch banked toward Bassett. They flew directly at each other. The Zeros dropped to 8,000 feet. Japanese pilots probably assumed the Americans were panicking, likely expecting a collision. But Thatch and Bassett avoided impact. At 400 yards, both pilots banked sharply. Thatch pulled left. Bassett pulled right. They crossed with 200 feet of separation. Then they continued turning, crossing again. A figure 8 pattern. Two planes weaving like the matches on Thatch's desk. The lead Zero pilot selected Bassett, committed to the pursuit, closed to 600 yards. Standard Zero tactics. Get close, exploit superior maneuverability, hammer the target with 20mm cannon fire. The Zero pilot likely expected Bassett to turn away, but Bassett turned toward Thatch instead. The Zero followed, lining up for a shot. 500 yards? 400 yards. The Zero had Bassett centered in the gun sight, 3 seconds from firing. Then Thatch's Wildcat streaked through the weave from the opposite direction. The Zero now faced a dilemma. Chase Bassett into another Wildcat's line of fire, or disengage. He broke off, pulled hard right, climbed. The remaining 5 Zeros dispersed. For the first time in Pacific combat, Zeros were retreating from Wildcats. Sheedy and Coulson observed the weave's effectiveness and tried it themselves. 2 more Wildcats wove together. Another Zero, committed to Coulson's tail, reached 400 yards. Then Sheedy's weave forced the Zero pilot to flinch, climb, and disengage. The dogfight lasted 6 minutes. 6 Japanese Zeros versus 4 American Wildcats. Expected outcome: 4 Americans down. Actual outcome: all 4 Wildcats remained airborne. Thatch checked fuel, checked his wingmen, all unscathed. The weave had succeeded. He landed at Ford Island 40 minutes later, hands trembling not from fear but adrenaline. Perhaps, just perhaps, American pilots didn't have to die every time they faced Zeros. Yet Fighter Command remained unconvinced. Thatch submitted his combat report that afternoon, described the weave, recommended immediate adoption. Response arrived 3 days later. Interesting tactic. Needs further testing. Not approved for widespread use. Thatch stared at it for a long moment. 43 pilots dead in February, and Command wanted more tests. Meanwhile, the Japanese were plotting something bigger. In 68 days, Thatch would confront 50 Zeros over Midway with 8 Wildcats. Between February and June 1942, Thatch drilled Fighting Squadron 3 in the weave daily. Morning flights, afternoon sorties, night formations. When the moon was bright, pilots practiced the pattern blind. Turn toward your wingman. Cross. Turn back. Cross again. Simple in concept, brutal in execution at 300 Menipi Toimhur with Zeros firing. The Navy hadn't approved it officially, but Thatch didn't wait. He taught every willing pilot, demonstrated matches, sketched diagrams, explained the geometry. If a Zero commits to your tail, turn into your wingman. The Zero must choose. Follow into your wingman's guns or break off. Either way, you survive. Some grasped it immediately. Others thought Thatch was insane. One squadron commander even argued the weave violated fundamental fighter doctrine. You can't fly toward another aircraft in combat. You'll collide. You'll panic. You'll get both pilots killed. But Thatch kept teaching because pilots kept dying. By May, the Pacific Fleet had lost 91 Wildcats in combat, with Zeros, 91 funerals, 91 letters to families, and Fighter Command still issued the same orders. Avoid engagement when possible. Run if outnumbered. The orders might as well have said, give up and die. Then naval intelligence intercepted Japanese radio traffic. Codebreakers at Station Hypo and Pearl Harbor decrypted the messages. The Japanese were planning a massive assault on Midway Island. 4 aircraft carriers, 270 aircraft, the largest carrier operation in Japanese naval history. The attack was scheduled for June 4, 1942. Admiral Chester Nimitz called every available carrier to Pearl Harbor. He had 3 Yorktown Enterprise and Hornet. The Japanese had 4, plus 2 years of combat experience, plus Zeros that could outfly anything America had. The math was nightmare fuel. American carriers were outnumbered. American pilots were outmatched, and Midway Island had a runway that Japanese bombers would turn into rubble in the first 30 minutes. Fighting Squadron 3 got deployment orders on May 26th. Report to USS Yorktown. Prepare for carrier operations. Thatch read those orders and understood what they meant. His squadron would be flying combat air patrol over Yorktown when the Japanese attacked, protecting the carrier from bombers, fighting Zeros, maybe dying. He gathered his pilots that evening. 7 men, 7 Wildcats, 7 lives depending on a trick with matches that the Navy still hadn't officially approved. Thatch showed them the matches one more time, explained the weave one more time. Then he told them the truth. The Japanese are bringing 50 Zeros to Midway. Maybe more. We'll have 8 Wildcats. Maybe fewer if Enterprise or Hornet lose fighters before the battle. The only way we survive is the weave. The only way we protect Yorktown is the weave. The only way we win is the weave. One pilot asked the obvious question. What if it doesn't work? What if we weave and the Zeros just shoot us anyway? Thatch didn't have a good answer. He just showed them the matches again. Showed them how 2 matches weaving could cover each other, could protect each other, could survive together when surviving alone was impossible. Yorktown sailed from Pearl Harbor on May 30th. 4 days to Midway. 4 days to prepare for a battle that would decide the Pacific War. 4 days to pray that a matchstick trick would work when 50 Zeros came screaming out of the sky. Because on June 4th at 0930 hours, Thatch would look up and see something no American pilot had ever faced. A sky completely black with Japanese fighters. June 4th, 1942, 0930 hours. Thatch was at 14,000 ft above Yorktown when the first Japanese strike wave appeared. 18 Aichi dive bombers escorted by 12 Zeros. Not 50, not the massive formation intelligence had predicted, but 12 Zeros was still 3.1 odds against Thatch's 4-plane section. The Zeros came in high 15,000 Hider F2 standard Japanese doctrine. Establish altitude advantage. Dive on American fighters. Use speed and maneuverability to dominate the fight. Thatch counted the enemy aircraft. Counted his own. 4 Wildcats, 12 Zeros. His hand keyed the radio. Weave pattern. Execute on my mark. His wingman, Lieutenant Junior Grade Edward Bassett, was 600 ft to his right. 2 more Wildcats behind them. The Zeros dove. Thatch watched them commit. Watched them pick targets. 3 Zeros broke toward Thatch. 4 went after Bassett. The others continued toward Yorktown. Thatch gave the order. Mark, execute. He turned hard toward Bassett. Bassett turned toward him. They crossed paths at 12,000 Drathheiter. The 3 Zeros chasing FGH suddenly had a problem. Their target was flying directly at another Wildcat, and that Wildcat's guns were pointing at them. The lead Zero pilot hesitated just for 2 seconds, but 2 seconds at combat speed is 400 wadilers. Thatch came through the weave and opened fire. 50 caliber rounds ripped through the Zero's engine cowling. The Zero rolled left, trailing black smoke, fell away. Thatch's first Zero kill, but the other 2 Zeros didn't break off. They'd seen the weave, understood the pattern, and they adapted. Instead of committing to Thatch's tail, they split. One went high, one went low. They tried to attack from different angles, forced Thatch to choose which threat to counter. Thatch pulled into a climbing turn toward the high Zero. Bassett broke toward the low Zero. The weave pattern fractured for 6 seconds. Both Wildcats were fighting independently, exactly what Thatch had tried to avoid. The high Zero got Gunson Thatch at 800 Wallers, added 20 mm cannon fire, walked up Thatch's left wing. 2 rounds spunched through the wing root. One went through his cockpit canopy 3 in from his head. Thatch felt the shock wave. Felt aluminum fragments hit his flight suit. Kept turning. Bassett called over the radio. I'm hit. Repeat, I'm hit. Thatch looked left. Bassett's Wildcat was trailing white smoke. Coolant leak. Maybe worse. The low Zero was still on his tail, hammering him with machine gun fire. Thatch made a choice. abandoned his turn toward the high zero, dove toward Bassett. The weave had broken, but the principle still worked. Get between your wingman and the threat. Thatch came down on the low zero from 7 high. 600 YDs, 500, 400. He opened fire. The zero exploded. Pieces of wing and fuselage tumbled through the air. Bassett's Wildcat was shaking, losing altitude. He called over the radio, "Anine's overheating. I'm heading back to Yorktown." Thatch told him, "Go." Told the other 2 Wildcats to escort him. That left Thatch alone at $11,000 FT with 10 zeros still in the sky. The weave worked with a wingman. Without a wingman, Thatch was just another Wildcat pilot trying not to die. He turned toward Yorktown, started descending. 30 saw him, turned to intercept. Thatch looked around for friendly fighters. Saw 4 Wildcats from another Squadron 3 MI East. Too far to help. The 3 zeros were closing. Thatch had no wingman, no weave, no options except run. But running meant leading zeros toward Yorktown, leading them toward the carrier his squadron was supposed to protect. He keyed his radio, called for help, told the other Wildcats he was engaging 3 zeros solo. Told them if the weave worked, they'd see proof. If it didn't work, tell his wife he loved her. Thatch turned his Wildcat toward 3-0 and prepared to test whether a matchstick trick could save one pilot's life. Thatch was at 9,000 FT when the 3 zeros reached firing range. He was alone. No wingman to weave with, no support. But he'd spent 4 months thinking about the weave. 4 months understanding the geometry. And he realized something. The weave didn't require 2 aircraft. It required 2 points in space. He turned hard right, then immediately reversed left. Sharp angular turns, not the smooth turning fight zeros expected. The lead zero committed to follow Thatch's right turn, but Thatch was already reversing left. The zero pilot had to correct, had to pull harder, had to burn energy. Thatch did it again. Right turn, left reversal. The zero followed right. Thatch went left. The Japanese pilot was always half a second behind, always correcting, always reacting. And every correction cost speed, cost energy, cost the altitude advantage. After 40 seconds of reversals, the zero was co-altitude with Thatch. Same speed, same energy state, no advantage. The zero pilot broke off, climbed away. The other 2 zeros followed him. Thatch had just proven something critical. The weave principle worked even without a wingman. Sharp reversals, constant direction changes. Never let the enemy predict your next move. Make them react. Make them bleed energy. Make them quit. He landed on Yorktown 20 minutes later. Bassett was already aboard. His Wildcat had taken 4 hits, but the engine held together long enough to reach the carrier. The other pilots from Fighting Squadron 3 were debriefing in the ready room. They'd all seen Thatch's solo fight. All watched him survive 3 zeros alone. Word spread through the fighter squadrons that afternoon. Thatch's weave works, even solo, even outnumbered. By evening, pilots from Enterprise and Hornet were asking Thatch to explain the tactic. He showed them the matches, drew diagrams, demonstrated the reversals. Some pilots tested it that night. Pair flights over the carrier groups, practicing the weave, learning the timing. By June 5th, 18th Wildcat pilots could execute the pattern. By June 6th, 32 pilots, the weave was spreading through the fleet faster than any official doctrine ever had. Japanese pilots noticed radio intercepts from June 7th, included references to new American tactics, American fighters flying in coordinated pairs, American fighters executing unpredictable maneuvers, American fighters that refused to die. One intercepted message from a Japanese fighter commander said, "American Wildcat pilots have changed their methods. Expect increased resistance." On June 10th, Fighting Squadron 3 flew combat air patrol over a convoy near Midway. 8 Wildcats, 14 zeros attacked. Thatch called the weave. All 4 pairs executed. The zeros tried their standard tactics, tried to isolate individual Wildcats, tried to use superior maneuverability. But every time a zero committed to a wildcat's tail, that wildcat turned toward his wingman. Every time the zeros tried to split a pair, both wildcats turned toward each other. The pattern held. After 12 minutes, the zeros broke off. They damaged 2 wildcats, but scored 0 kills. The Americans had shot down 3 zeros, 3 confirmed kills. First time in Pacific combat that wildcats had a positive kill ratio against zeros in a major engagement. Fighter Command finally took notice. On June 15th, Commander John Thatch received orders to report the Pearl Harbor. Report to Admiral Nimitz. Prepare a formal briefing on the weave tactic. The Navy wanted to evaluate whether this matchstick trick should become official doctrine. Thatch arrived at Pearl Harbor on June 18th, spent 2 days preparing the briefing. Prepared diagrams, combat footage, pilot testimonials, kill ratios, survival statistics, everything command needed to see that the weave worked. But while Thatch was preparing his briefing, Japanese intelligence was preparing something else. They'd analyzed the new American tactics, preparing something else. They'd analyzed the new American tactics. They'd studied the weave pattern, and they developed a counter-tactic, a way to break the weave, a way to kill both wildcats at once. On June 21st, Thatch would brief Admiral Nimitz on the weave. But on June 23rd, Fighting Squadron 3 would face 18 zeros over Santa Cruz Island, and those zeros would be using tactics specifically designed to destroy the Thatcher June 23rd, 1942. Air 815 hours, Santa Cruz Island. Fighting Squadron 3 was escorting a convoy when radar picked up contacts. 18 bogies inbound from the northwest. Distance 12 maybes. Thatch counted his wildcats. 8 aircraft, 4 pairs, standard weave formation. He'd briefed Nimitz 3 days earlier. Nimitz had authorized field testing of the weave across all Pacific fighter squadrons. Now Thatch was about to discover that the Japanese had done their homework too. The zeros came in at 16,000 FT, but they didn't dive immediately. They circled, waited. Thatch watched them orbit at altitude for 90 seconds. Strange behavior. Zeros always attacked immediately, always used altitude advantage fast before Americans could climb. But these zeros were waiting for something. Then Thatch understood. The zeros were coordinating. 6 zeros broke left, 6 broke right, 6 stayed high. 3 groups, 3 angles of attack. They'd seen the weave. They knew 2 wildcats could protect each other from one direction, but 3 directions simultaneously. That was different. The attack came at 0817, 6 due from high. 6 came in from the left flank, 6 from the right. Thatch called the weave, but his pilots hesitated. Which threat do you counter when threats are coming from 3 directions? Lieutenant Bassett chose the high zeros, turned into them, but that exposed his right flank to the right side group. Ensignity turned to cover Bassett's right, but that broke the weave pattern with his own wingmen. Suddenly, all 4 pairs were fragmented. 8 wild cats fighting independently. Exactly what the Japanese wanted. Thatch saw it happening, saw the weave collapsing. Keats radio. Reform pairs, lock onto your wingmen. Execute standard weave, ignore the other groups. His pilots heard him. Bassett turned hard toward his wingman, found him, lock it in. They executed the weave even with zeros attacking from multiple directions. The high zeros dove. Bassett turned toward his wingman. The zeros followed, flew into his wingman's guns. 2 zeros exploded. The others pulled up. The left group tried next. Came in at 14,000 odd eaters. Thatch and his wingman executed the weave. 1 zero committed, flew through the crossing pattern. Took 50 caliber rounds through the cockpit. Fell away smoking. The right group attacked Shetty's pair. Same result. Weave held. 0 crashed. After 8 minutes, the Japanese had lost 5 zeros. The Americans had lost 0 wildcats. The coordinated 3-direction attack had failed. The zeros climbed away. But Thatch knew something critical had just happened. The Japanese had adapted. They'd studied the weave. They developed counter-tactics. The fact that the counter-tactics failed didn't matter. What mattered was Japanese command was taking the weave seriously, taking it seriously enough to train pilots specifically to defeat it. That evening, Thatch filed a combat report, described the three-direction attack, described how the weave held even under coordinated assault, recommended immediate widespread adoption, no more testing, no more evaluation. The weave worked against standard tactics. It worked against adapted tactics. It worked. Period. The report reached Admiral Nimtitz on June 25th. Nimtitz forwarded it to Admiral King, Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Fleet. King read it. Read the kill ratios. Read the survival statistics. 0 American losses, 5 Japanese losses, 8 Wildcats versus 18 Dogfights. On June 29th, Admiral King issued Fleet Order 41-1942. All fighter squadrons in the Pacific Fleet would immediately adopt the Thatch Weave as standard combat doctrine. Mandatory training for all pilots. Mandatory execution in all engagements. The matchstick trick was now official U.S. Navy tactics. But orders from Washington took time to reach every squadron. Time to train pilots, time to practice the pattern, and the Japanese weren't waiting. On July 7th, over Guadalcanal, 32 Zeros would attack 12 Wildcats from 6 different squadrons. Some squadrons knew the weave, some didn't. And the ones that didn't would learn the hard way why Thatch had been teaching matches for 5 months. July 7, 1942, Guadalcanal. 12 Wildcats from 6 different squadrons flew combat air patrol over Henderson Field. 4 pilots had trained on the Thatchy. 8 had not. At 11:20 a.m., 32 Zeros appeared from the north. The 4 pilots who knew the weave immediately paired up, executed the pattern. The 8 who didn't know it fought independently. Traditional 1 versus 1 dog fighting. 22 minutes later, 6 Wildcats were shot down. All 6 were pilots who fought independently. The 4 pilots using the weave survived without damage. They claimed 7 zero kills between them. Admiral Hawley read that combat report and immediately issued orders. Every fighter pilot in the South Pacific would learn the Thatch Weave within 2 weeks. No exceptions. Training programs started on July 10th. Thatch flew to Guadalcanal, spent 3 weeks teaching the weave to every squadron on the island. Morning briefings, afternoon flight training, evening debriefs. He showed pilots the matches, drew the diagrams, flew demonstration patterns. Some pilots learned in 2 days, others needed a week, but every pilot learned. By August 1st, 96 Wildcat pilots could execute the weave. By September 1st, 214 pilots. The tactic spread from the Pacific to the Atlantic, from carriers to land bases, from Wildcats to other aircraft types. P-38 Lightning squadrons started using it. P-40 Warhawk squadrons. Even some bomber formations adapted the crossing pattern for defensive purposes. The results were immediate and dramatic. In June 1942, before the weave became doctrine, American fighters had a kill-to-loss ratio of 0.4421 against Zeros. For every 10 American fighters lost, Americans shot down 4 Zeros. By October 1942, after widespread weave adoption, the ratio was 2.1.1. Americans were shooting down 2 Zeros for every Wildcat lost. Japanese pilots hated it. Radio intercepts from September showed Japanese squadron commanders warning pilots about the American crossing pattern. Do not commit to tail chase. Do not follow American fighters into their wingman's guns. Disengage if Americans execute coordination tactics. But disengaging meant losing the fight, meant letting American fighters protect their bombers, meant giving up air superiority. The Zero was still faster and more maneuverable than the Wildcat, but speed and maneuverability meant nothing if you couldn't get guns on target. And the weave made it almost impossible to get guns on target. By January 1943, the weave was standard doctrine across all U.S. fighter squadrons. Army Air Force adopted it, Marine Corps adopted it, British Royal Navy pilots started learning it for their carriers. The tactic that started with 2 matches on a desk in San Diego had become the foundation of Allied fighter doctrine. Thach received the Navy Cross in February 1943. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism and distinguished service in the development of fighter tactics that have saved numerous American lives and contributed significantly to the success of U.S. naval aviation operations." But Thach didn't care about medals. He cared about numbers. In the 6 months before the WWII, the Pacific Fleet lost 137 Wildcats in combat with Zeros. In the 6 months after the WWII became doctrine, the fleet lost 41 Wildcats, 96 pilots who came home because 2 matches could cross paths. Fighter Command assigned Thach to training duty in March 1943, pulled him from combat operations, sent him back to San Diego to teach the WWII to new pilots. He hated it, hated being away from the fight. But Command told him he was more valuable as an instructor than as a combat pilot. More valuable teaching the trick than using it. Thach trained pilots for 18 months. Taught the WWII to over 800 naval aviators. Every one of those pilots took the tactic to combat. Every one of them survived situations they shouldn't have survived. And every one of them told other pilots about the commander who saved their lives with matchsticks. The war ended in August 1945. Thach was 40 years old. He'd flown 73 combat missions, scored 6 confirmed kills, received the Navy Cross, 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses, and 3 Air Medals. But none of that compared to the number that mattered. Over 2,000 American pilots survived the war because they knew how to weave. After the war ended, Thach faced a choice: stay in the Navy or return to civilian life. His wife wanted him home. His children barely knew him. He'd been gone for 4 years. But staying in the Navy meant continuing to teach, continuing to save lives. What would a man who saved 2,000 pilots with matchsticks do when the shooting stopped? John Thach stayed in the Navy. He couldn't walk away from teaching. Couldn't walk away from pilots who needed to survive. He spent the next 27 years training fighter pilots, developing tactics, saving lives without firing a shot. The Navy promoted him to commander in 1946, captain in 1952, rear admiral in 1960. He commanded carrier groups during the Korean War. Never flew combat again, but his pilots did. And every one of them knew the WWII. Korean War fighter pilots called it the Thach officially. No other tactic in military history carried a pilot's name while he was still alive. During Vietnam, the WWII evolved. F4 Phantom pilots adapted it for supersonic speeds, called it Fluid 4 formation. Same principle, same crossing pattern, different speeds. American pilots used it against North Vietnamese MiGs. The MiG-17 could outturn the F4 just like the Zero outturned the Wildcat. But the WWII worked at 600 meters the same way it worked at 300. Thach retired from the Navy in 1973. 4-star admiral, 40 years of service. He moved back to San Diego, lived quietly, didn't talk much about the war, didn't talk about Midway or Guadalcanal, the 2,000 pilots. When reporters asked about the WWII, he always said the same thing. It wasn't genius. It was desperation. I just wanted my boys to come home. Fighter pilots never forgot him. Every year on February 10th, the anniversary of the first WWII combat test, naval aviators from around the country would call Thach, thank him, tell him stories about how the WWII saved their lives or their wingman's life. Thach listened to every story, remembered every name. The Navy named a building after him in 1981, Thach Halat Naval Air Station, Pensacola, Fighter Pilot Training Facility. Every naval aviator who earns their wings walks past a bronze plaque with Thach's face and 3 words: innovate, adapt, survive. Thach passed away on April 15, 2001, at the age of 86. His funeral at Arlington National Cemetery was attended by over 300 naval aviators, many in their 70s and 80s, men who had flown Wildcats in 1943, Phantoms in 1967, and Hornets in 1991. All of them lived because one commander had thought about matchsticks. Today, the thatch weave is still instructed at every fighter pilot school across the U.S. military, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps. Modern adaptations exist for stealth fighters and beyond visual range combat. Yet the fundamental principle remains unchanged. Two aircraft protecting one another, turning toward each other, intersecting paths, and surviving together. At the National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola, Thatch's original pack of matches is preserved in a glass case beside a model F4F Wildcat. The plaque reads that Lieutenant Commander John Thatch used these matches to develop a tactical innovation that saved more than 2,000 American pilots during World War II. Cantu school groups pass by the display daily. Most walk on, but fighter pilots pause. They observe those matches. They comprehend. If this story moved you as it did us, do a favor. Hit that like button. Each like signals YouTube to share this story with more people. Subscribe and enable notifications. Every week, we uncover forgotten tales from dusty archives. Stories of pilots and commanders who saved lives with ingenuity, courage, and matchsticks. Real people. Real heroism. Leave a comment now and tell us where you're watching from. Texas, Germany, Australia, Japan. Our community spans the globe. You're not just a viewer. You're helping preserve these memories. Share your location. Tell us if someone in your family served, or just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for helping ensure that John Thatch's legacy doesn't fade into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're part of making that happen. Part of making that happen.